Welcome to this episode of the Evincible Deep Tech Series. I'm Marcy Sutton, independent web developer and accessibility specialist. Here with me today is Lundy Hartshorn, product manager of digital accessibility at Capital One, Mark Penicook, director of digital accessibility, also at Capital One, as well as Navin Thadani, CEO of Evinced. Capital One is at the cutting edge of accessibility. They're in the process of integrating accessibility testing into all parts of their software development lifecycle. Evinced is their primary accessibility technology partner, and we're here to talk about how Capital One is using their suite of accessibility testing tools at scale in financial services. So, Mark, let's start with you. Can you describe your accessibility program at Capital One and how testing works into it? For example, manual testing, technology and tools, training, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Marcy. Would love to. These are my favorite types of discussions and topics. So, it's a pleasure to kind of share what we've done. And we've been on this journey for a while at Capital One, so over 10 years or so. The first thing I would say is we always start with technology and using tools to the best of our benefit and in kind of all the places that we can to help my team, who is a central enterprise team, is supporting the entire company, but as well as all of our performers. So developers who are, in their chair, coding, each and every day. And, one, we put tools and testing in their hands so that they can test, on the spot locally before kind of moving on to the next stage. And then for my team centrally, we do a very similar, same kind of automated testing for increments of work that come through us. So like each release or each sort of project that Capital One is pushing through our development life cycle and getting ready to publish comes to us in some form or fashion, and we will use automated tools to test that. And then we have manual testing that we also do there. It's to really go deep and test with assistive technologies, really look at all of the things that automation and tools can't do. And then also we test at scale. So we monitor our entire public-facing footprint each month using tools and automation at the scale that we have to do, to maintain that. And so we've really integrated testing, or continue to integrate in testing and invest in insertions throughout the entire software development lifecycle. And of course, like everyone, that you hear talk about shifting left, right? And getting earlier and earlier and earlier with better and better technology is our goal. And that's what we've been working really hard on for a long time.
So you mentioned shifting left, which as a developer, of course, that sets us up for success because we're not being handed things that haven't been designed with accessibility in mind. So sort of, thinking of that concept of shifting left, can you tell us about your vision for technology as it relates to accessibility? And how do these pieces fit together with design, development, continuous integration, QA, and so on? And how about hearing from you, Lundy?
It's actually interesting you alluded to shifting left, starting with design, and I think we're actually, the way, at least the way I see it as a product manager, it's actually further than that. It's got to go all the way to intent. So a designer is ultimately going to get intent from a business owner or a product manager, and it really has to start there. So there's a huge aspect of our program that's focused on, helping product owners introduce intent for accessibility earlier on, and then the tools really start to come in to place when the rubber does meet the road, and when you're in the designer's hands or as it transitions into engineering. So it really is at all points in our life cycle. But ultimately, getting better tools in the hands of developers is that ultimate goal. There's a lot of developers at Capital One. And we have, a very deep emphasis on developer experience, which has been a big shift when it comes to, as we look for products in those places, ultimately what we're trying to do.
essentially, through our work with Capital One, we've dealt not just with the digital accessibility team that Mark runs, but also with all of the development organizations that have been using Evinced as a part of this whole thing. And that focus on developer experience is really absolutely true in the case of Capital One. They've gone through a lot of pain internally to make sure that we have the right feedback so we can tune our products specifically for the kind of DX that they're talking about. We've stripped away certain things that were not essential. We've really kind of made the products a lot more pointed, and it's been great to get feedback directly from the Capital One development team as well.
Early on in our interactions with Evinced, the early prototype was a browser plugin, kind of prove out the technology. It was very much, let's see what we can do. And some early feedback that was solicited was that the user flow analyzer just was a little too bulky for the average developer. And Evinced was very quickly able to turn around and get us a product that, hid itself away in the dev debugger, much more lightweight, was able to scan a page quickly, didn't care as much about, particular flows, those types of things. So, that was a really great experience for both sides, just because as soon as we were getting feedback to Evinced, there was already, oh, yeah, we've been hearing that, there's a solution for that. And so I think that is, Navin, you've asked for us to like double click down. I think those feedback loops are something that I think our developers are maybe not even used to as much as they probably should be. I had one developer on a pipeline, or he was working on an automation team that supports a very big application for us, was staggered that he gave us, we gave feedback to Evinced about a couple features we needed to really make the SDK implementable and make it so we could roll it out. And 2 weeks later, they had done most of what he asked for, which I'm pretty confident he had no clue that was going to happen. So when you really talk about like developers in their trenches and shifting left, I mean, there's definitely the whole idea of getting it closer to developers, but then also reinforcing those feedback loops to improve their experience, which then ultimately makes accessibility easier and easier. Which there's lots of developers out there that maybe see the accessibility as an afterthought, or it's a pain or a chore. But I can see we're really making things a little bit easier.
So you, as at Capital One, you've undoubtedly worked with a ton of vendors, lots of different tools, but you're working with a new partner, Evinced, who have a new suite of tools, kind of newcomers in the industry. So I'm curious, what was that spark? What was that essence of Evinced tooling that you wanted to join so early? What challenges were you facing that necessitated a new approach to accessibility testing?
Previously had to do accessibility with different venture. It was Surprise, and like it was born out of very real, very tangible feelings of like, this has to be easier. This is automatable. Like, it's not impossible. He told me that story very early on, and you see that in a lot of what they do. There's always looking for a new challenge. They're always innovating. And I think it was just that novel approach was very intriguing, especially, in the early days.
Innovation, like, from the very beginning, right? From the jump, it's like, we have a better mousetrap. I think the other thing too, to me, that was super important was scalability. Like, solutions that can scale. We have a large enterprise. I'm managing a really large program with a lot of assets that we are responsible for staying on top of. And we needed something, and wanted something too that absolutely solved a large enterprise problem in an elegant way.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think if I remember correctly, the first time like we were talking about different points in the software development lifecycle, when after we did the browser extension, when Mark's team came back and said, "That's great, good, you guys got that under control. Now we need to look at the entire sort of production site scanning type of thing and make sure that we have regular reports and all that." So we started working with them on requirements. And we understood that some of the approaches that they were using in prior to that would take 4 to 5 days to scan the entire site. So we took that as a requirement to be able to do orders of magnitude better than that in terms of like faster scanning and things like that. So when we went to the drawing board, we kind of put together an overall cloud architecture, which has Kubernetes services underneath. It's spinning up all of these different kind of browsers and containers in the cloud. And we put together a scanning service that I think at this point in time can do the whole thing in about an hour, right? Basically scan the whole site. So again, we would not necessarily have known that this was such a high priority, and the kind of requirements, again, even in the case of site scanning, how that drives our technology approach and how it drives our architecture in general, again, is a great example of, I think, superb sort of leadership and vision from Capital One, and us following and trying to deliver the best that we can on those requirements.
So developers and QA specialists at Capital One use the Evinced User Flow Analyzer extension. What advantages have you seen with this tool compared to other extensions and testing tools on the market? Lundy, let's hear from you.
A couple of things that comes to mind. I think the validations is probably the biggest thing. Evinced has rolled out a handful of their own unique validations. At the end of the day, many other products are not, capable of finding those types of issues. So we're seeing a lift just simply in the fact that it's finding more issues. And I think the other thing is deployability. The product we probably have the most impact with is that user flow analyzer, and it's a Chrome extension. Everyone has access to them. They're inherently pretty secure. There's not a lot that can be done with them, and so I think for big organizations, like there's very little downside to using a browser extension in this way, and especially one that statistically compared to some of its competitors is just better at detecting issues. So I think between those two things, that's probably the biggest lift we see. There's probably some UX elements, the simple fact that it's fairly easy to use, and they're constantly making improvements in that way. But brass tacks, it finds more stuff.
Yeah, I personally love the keyboard testing features, which have not really been possible with, really the state of web technology. So it's cool to see some innovation in that space so that you don't have to have everything relegated to manual testing. While that is important and useful, like you say, doing this at scale, you really have to throw new tooling at it. So it's cool to hear how that's worked out for your team.
And one of the other things that we did, again, in discussions with Capital One around this Flow Analyzer browser extension, was that all the existing tooling and technologies that at least we had seen at that point in time used to do a single page state analysis at a time. So when you interact with a page and you basically through that interaction, you're causing DOM mutations, you want to be able to analyze those as well automatically without having to keep kind of scanning things manually. So again, we added an automatic sort of listening engine that would track for any interactions that caused DOM mutations. We had to build technology that was then going to center only on that changed piece of the DOM to analyze things. So there's a lot of stuff that we implement under the covers based on input from folks like Capital One that are in this case really kind of using the products on a daily basis and have so much experience with it and are giving us feedback to improve it. So,
and it's solving like real capacity problems. There's only so much manual testing we can do. Bloating your team to astronomical sizes, yeah, you can test more, but it's not sustainable. I guess it is scalable if you've got infinite amount of money, but no one really does. And so the more we're able to do, with like just the browser plugins, honestly, when a team submits feature for review, one of the things that's required is that they have to use the browser plugin and have no issues. So at some point, once we got the confidence we needed in the browser plugin, we were like, okay, from now on, if you submit a review and one of our analysts, a non-technical analyst, opens the Evinced browser plugin and you have issues, it goes right back. And that's one of the ways that we've been able to keep pace with, code's flowing faster than it ever has, and it's only going to keep going faster. That has been a very tangible way that it's impacted our business, not just our customers.
Well, you mentioned the site scanner earlier that the digital accessibility team uses, and that's a common request I had seen in the industry over the past few years is there a free site scanner or even a site scanner that teams could get access to without it being locked away behind some sales demo process? So site scanners have been very not necessarily popular. I think the access has been an issue. So there is now a site scanner from Evinced that your team is using. So I'd love to hear what benefits you're seeing with the site scanner compared to other tools that you've used in the past.
Kind of getting to the bottom line, bottom line here is that we're able to detect way more than we've ever had before. We're doing it faster than we ever have before. So orders of magnitude on that. So things that we were never discovering or able to discover, or there weren't any tools that we could use to discover these things. We're able to automate and do that now. And then we're doing it really, really fast. So the other thing that I would just say too, from an industry perspective and so forth, is a lot of things start with the site scanner notions, right? Like, so, the public deals with your products that are public, that are out there in the public. That's what they're interacting with every day. You know what I mean? And that's also where scanners or other tools, can look at the accessibility of your properties and so forth. So it's an important capability. It's an extremely important capability to have it, and one that also should be really good, right? Like, you want to have confidence in those results. I mean, that's huge. Like, it needs to be like absolutely valid, and that's it's not a small point to make. But anyway, Lundy, I'll kick it to you.
No, I recently actually gotten some feedback on this exact subject from one of my peers on the accessibility team who manages more of the monitoring aspects and is the kind of the main consumer of the site scanner. And he pointed out a few things, just to name a few, which is that the configuration of the crawler with Evinced is super easy. There, like regex examples, how to set up your domains. We have a pretty large footprint of things we're scanning. So being able to do that, and then also, big properties that have lots of teams that are working on them, we're able to kind of cut those up into components, into sensible chunks, which provides a lot of value to us in how we then manage that data once it's within our walls. We're able to add more context in easier ways. So that's been a huge path forward. And again, we've said this a bunch of times, but just simply finding more things. And then I think our experience with events in particular has been, there is always going to be, until we have, solved all the world's problems, a air of subjectivity when it comes to accessibility and accessibility findings. And specifically with the crawler, we get really good, insight at a decent sized, well, insight's not the right word. We get a decent sized data set every month that then we can look at and say, man, this is a pattern we see all the time. Is it really a problem? Does it, is this something that Capital One is doing? Is this something that the industry is doing? And then being able to, configure that scanner to either ignore those things or to categorize it in a particular kind of way. So there's that feedback between the two companies, and being able to configure it as such, has been really helpful in us kind of getting away some of the noise.
Yeah, the context element of things. Yeah. And, I think it totally makes sense. And this also ties into what we were chatting about earlier, which is the big data issue, right? You're scanning so often, you're scanning so many pages, you're collecting issues, you're collecting DOM snippets, you're collecting all kinds of things, screenshots for every issue. Those kinds of things add up. Now you're looking at this massive amount of data. You've got to make it digestible. You've got to be able to use algorithms to essentially make sense out of them and help accessibility teams make sense out of them. So those are, again, areas that we collaborate with Capital One on to shape our algorithms and our product development to really add value.
That's right.
So far, we've talked about the user flow analyzer extension and the site scanner. So one more question about Evinced tooling and how you're using it. Your development team has started using an Evinced automation SDK for your continuous integration pipeline. What advantages have you seen with that SDK?
I mean, the biggest thing is it's an area where we haven't had a lot of penetration. So in pipeline testing, any modern organization, DevOps, is huge. The more you can automate, the more that can be done in the pipeline, the better. So there's a very deep appetite for that. But what the big thing is like I said, those are places, pre-production environments, places where we were never able to scan before, or never able to generate data outside of manual testing, or something that the developer was doing themselves in like a browser plugin. So, and Navin alluded to this earlier. It's like, if your application has 1,000 tests and some segment of them is being run every time code is integrated into your environments, you're seeing just tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of times that code is being tested to make sure that new things aren't being introduced. And ultimately, we haven't got to the point where we're really taking full advantage of what that's going to mean. But the in pipeline or those SDKs are what is going to enable us to get closer to that real-time environment, because we're going to be seeing accessibility issues as they come out of developers' fingers. And I think on top of that, they've made it pretty easy. I'm not a developer anymore. I used to write, some front-end code back in the day, but it is really just kind of as simple as add the library, start the test, stop the test in, each one of your functional tests. And then, that can run in your suite. We have, we've added some Capital One flavor on top of that, put a wrapper around it to abstract the technology a little bit, so that it plays nicer in the environment that developers are used to. So, we've done a little bit on top of that, but, ultimately it's those areas, we never had automation in those places before. And that by far is the big lift.
Yeah, and really, I'm so happy to firstly hear that. And then I also want to point out that, Lundy's talking about how they did a little lift. It actually wasn't a little lift. It was a great innovation for their environment, where they were able to take our SDKs, the Cypress SDK specifically in this case, and stick it into their basic test infrastructure. So now feature teams, from what I understand, right, Lundy, don't need to even worry about accessibility tests. They get them for free. And it's really that, that's super cool in my view, and real sort of, that's the major lift from an industry perspective. I think imagine if everybody, all developers, front-end developers these days, are writing and maintaining their own functional tests. They have to do it. It's a part of their job, right? It's always well maintained because they want to make sure it doesn't fail. So if they move a button around, they do whatever, this or that, but the tests still, tune the tests so that they still work. All of this work, and then under the covers, the accessibility piece is just added in automatically. So developers don't even care about the integration part of it, or don't have to worry about the integration part. It's done for them automatically by the Capital One test infrastructure team. I think that is super cool.
And then on top of that, the componentization of kind of the modern web means that's, you get a multiplicative result where we have a set of components that are being tested all the time, but those components are being deployed, in scale across all of our organizations. So while, we use something like the site scanner to give us that reach, we can be really targeted about how to fix things, where they're coming from, where they initiate. And, when you start to string products together like this, what we're starting to be able to do is build an audit trail of, this is the first time we saw it. This is when it was introduced in this environment. This was when we saw it in production. The goal is obviously to make sure that it never hits production, but nonetheless, we're able to now again gain insight of the life cycle of these bugs, and then really understand what that means. And from a business perspective, you're able to really start to calculate, like, this one issue that's in a component multiplied to 10,000 issues in production, and if that was a serious enough issue, that could cause a really serious problem. You can say, okay, well, a couple hours of a developer's time, saved an astronomical amount of time and money, depending on, what the exposure of the components are. And so being able to have, to test accessibility where we have really robust functional tests, and then layer on something like the site scanner for applications that may not have, are not as heavily componentized or don't have as big of a test bed. It's kind of that layered Swiss cheese where we're just making it harder for issues to make it through all the holes.
So how does mobile fit into your overall vision for accessibility?
Well, and as much as everyone would love to stop talking about it, COVID has, made the need for mobile accessibility, more important than ever. For one reason or another, not being able to be in a bank branch, or not being able to be around other people who maybe were helping you with your finances. Like, it just reinforced how important it is for us, to have mobile accessible experiences. And make no mistake, up until this point, mobile testing for us was a manual endeavor, from the developers all the way up to the digital accessibility team, and how we maintain and monitor our compliance. It was all manual. There are tools out there, not saying that there aren't, but they either weren't very feature rich, or didn't detect very much, or were a burden to implement. Believe me, we tried over the years to get teams to try this library, try that thing. They were doing it by themselves because they were dealing with the bottleneck that I've kind of already mentioned, in fast-paced environments. So over the past year, talking about Evinced internally, getting people excited to use it, the number one question was, what about mobile? What about mobile? What about mobile? To which, we have taken, we've solicited lots of requirements, and actually just got a sneak peek of some new Evinced tools just this week. So, I think the future is very bright. There's a lot of capabilities that we're going to be able to do, both in the manual QA space, but also in automation, that we just straight up didn't have before.
Yeah, and again, another great example of getting requirements from Capital One. What's important? How should we look at it? We ended up sort of breaking it out into two separate products, if you will. One of them is an analyzer product that developers, of course, but also QA engineers and the digital accessibility team, and pretty much anybody can use to very quickly test the accessibility of any app, iOS, Android, whatever. So that's one sort of set of products that were, again, shaped by requirements from Capital One. And then, as Lundy was pointing out, the automation SDK is there as well. Like you have automation testing in the case of web with like Cypress and other frameworks like that, you also have automation testing, of course, for mobile. It's exactly the same sort of functional testing in either XCUI test or Appium or Espresso or any one of these frameworks. So we've been working with them to try to understand how best to integrate there as well. And we're really excited for our upcoming, automation products, even for mobile, as we're pointing out. So I think this is really great, and again, a classic example of solid partnership between the two companies.
That is great to hear, because people need to be able to do their banking from anywhere, and mobile is a huge part of that. So great to hear about those developments. So I have one last question for you, Mark and Lundy. What's next for your accessibility program?
Oh, Marcy, such a great question. The future is bright. We have so many plans and so many things that we're looking forward to. For us, like it truly kind of comes down to a couple of different things, and I think we really sort of told you about those throughout our conversation. today. But for us, the instrumentation, standardization, automation, and precision, generating intelligence that leads to strengthened capabilities and empowering folks all across our company, developers. But we want to see developers who take a leap in their accessibility acumen of development or whatever, but they do so with our assistance through our tooling and through our training and through all of the kind of partnerships we set up. So the kind of non-cliche answer to that really is getting to a point where we're proactive, super fast, like, we said approaching instantaneous and real time. And those are some, buzzwords that are thrown around a lot. But I mean, the idea of getting to, pushing into that very cutting edge of how fast we can know about things, where we know about things. Lundy mentioned the full sort of archaeology and anatomy of everything that we see and we find, and have intelligent insights based on all the data and so forth. And so that will allow us to take our program into areas of efficiency and optimizations like that we really want to get to. And super excited about it.
Yeah, and then the quantum leap after we get to that point, then our team really being able to shift into improving experiences. There's a lot to be said that accessible experiences provide lift to everyone, not just folks with disabilities, as we know. And so it's the long-term ambition of our team that we can get accessibility as far as the basics, this is the foundation we're on, but yes, and like, how can we make this thing better given the knowledge that we have, the perspective that we have, and can we provide lift, can we increase improve a customer experience in real tangible ways that are outside of core design activities, or leaning into a new product development so that from the very beginning accessibility is ingrained in the very essence of that product, as opposed to seeing it after it started to take shape and kind of nitpicking it apart, which is the kind of the reputation that accessibility teams have. So it's how do we be more proactive in creating those experiences for our customers.
So there you have it. This session of the Evincible Deep Tech Series has uncovered insights of how Capital One has worked with Evinced to incorporate accessibility testing at scale. In the next episode of this series, we'll talk more about native accessibility testing from iOS and Android to React Native. You can find Evinced on Twitter at Evinced_A11Y, as well as on LinkedIn. Until next time.
For more information about Evinced and to read the Capital One white paper, visit www.evinced.com.